I'm Charlie McAlpin from Eastern Maine Electric Co-op in Calais, Maine. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
Support for Along Those Lines comes from Power Intel. Whether maintaining fiber networks or exploring deployment, Power Intel has the products and services you need. Let Power Intel's value-added services simplify your network deployments. Visit www.ptsupply.com to learn more.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. The inclusion of a so-called direct pay provision in the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act was a big win for electric cooperatives. The new law gives co-ops and other tax-exempt entities, which ordinarily would have difficulty accessing federal tax incentives, the ability to receive reimbursements from the federal treasury for deploying certain new energy technologies, effectively leveling the playing field with for-profit providers. How did co-ops secure this groundbreaking change in the tax code, and how does it change the game for electric co-ops going forward? To answer those and other questions, we'll talk to Paul Gutierrez. He's NRECA's Legislative Affairs Director and the association's point person on getting direct pay passed. Later, we'll talk to McLennan, the CEO of Minnkota Power Cooperative in North Dakota, and Jung, CEO at Northeastern REMC in Indiana, about how their co-ops intend to leverage the new law. Paul, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, so why don't we start by getting up to speed on exactly what this direct pay law is, what it does for co-ops, and what projects can it be used for?
Okay. The best way to describe it is actually a direct payment from the federal treasury to an electric co-op. It's a tax credit. Normally, the way tax credits work is you have tax liability and then you get a credit against that tax liability that you would owe, right? But because the vast majority of electric co-ops are not-for-profit, federally tax-exempt for income tax purposes, we pay a lot of property taxes, some sales taxes, but for federal income tax, we are exempt from paying federal income tax. So we have no tax liability. So you would have a tax credit that is on the books, but you can't take advantage of it because you don't have the offset of taxes. So let's say that you have zero tax liability in our case, but you're eligible to receive up to a 30% tax credit in the case of an investment tax credit. But that tax credit would sit on the books. What direct pay allows is that the co-ops can then apply to the IRS, file a tax form, they're still developing that, then receive that tax credit as money directly back to offset the cost of those projects going in the ground. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's perfect. I know this is essentially a clean energy initiative or incentive program. Talk about some of the specific projects that a co-op might find use for with this credit.
Sure. Well, one of the things that we really advocated for, because our members use all types of fuels to produce energy, right? Nuclear, there is a production tax credit for existing nuclear. Carbon capture tax credits are also available to our members. Those typically weren't thought of as the refundable tax credits in the clean energy space, but those most definitely qualify. You have wind and solar as well. For EV charging stations. In addition, there's a new tax credit that's kind of been decoupled for energy storage, for battery storage. So it is a broad swath.
Give us a sense of what co-ops have had to do in the absence of this direct pay. What hoops have they had to go through to actually be able to leverage federal tax incentives?
That's a good question. Most of the time, when we go out and we show our renewable portfolio, look at the ownership bar and you look at the power bar, and it's like 99% of our renewables have been purchased because the purchase power agreements have been there. It's, you have a for-profit company that is able to take the tax credits, either sell them on a tax equity market or use them against their liability. And most of the times, they're not passing that savings on to us. They have responsibility to their shareholders to maximize their profits. So it was often purchase power agreements. Some may have been shared. Others, you might have had a tax equity flip where you create a for-profit company to be able to take the tax equity, flip it, sell it onto Wall Street. Nothing against Wall Street bankers and lawyers, but they take a cut of that, right? So, 10, 15, 20% off the top of that tax credit then goes to the attorneys and the bankers to make it all flow. And then ownership would go back to the co-op. So it was a lot of other financiers trying to figure out how to make that work instead of like, let's get the engineering on the ground, let's keep the cost low and pass that on to our members.
So in an ideal world, all of that sort of disappears now that there is this direct pay. We all know how Washington works. You're working to make sure that the rules that are written around this direct pay incentive are written with co-ops in mind. Can you talk a little bit about what you're asking and what the timetable for that is?
Treasury has a lot on their plate. They have a lot of new rules and regs to put in place. And they're still going through the guidance process. It takes a while for them to develop this and to develop the form as to how we're going to claim this. But one of the things that we've been really trying to push to Treasury, to the IRS, is that the rules have to be fair. There have to be guardrails, but they have to be workable and simple enough to where it's not going to be so complicated that our members aren't going to want to be able to take advantage of it or not be able to take advantage of it.
So at this point, knowing what you know, is there anything co-ops can do now to get ready to make sure they can tap into this resource?
Yeah, the first thing is really to work with their tax advisor, because even as straightforward as it can be, taxes are complicated, right? There's still questions. There's all interpretations. So if you're going to do a renewable project, if you're going to do a solar project, a storage project, wind project, go into it with the idea that there is a tax credit that's available out there. Don't chase the money, but look at what might be available to you in the tax space, but also in the grant space, because there's some other money that was in the IRA that might allow them to stack some of these grants on top of it. But really keeping the records and talking to their tax advisor, because there are things in the Inflation Reduction Act that they'll have to comply with, or their contractors will have to comply with. I would say as co-ops look at these projects, don't shy away from some of the complexity that may occur in the tax code, because inevitably everybody has to deal with that.
How would you frame this issue in terms of the broader program and the history of the program? How big of a game changer is this in terms of the ability of co-ops to now own assets and to have control over their generation and the assets that they put towards serving their members?
I think that it's probably one of the biggest environmental energy bills since probably 2005 or 2008. Because now you can get, as a base credit, if you comply with the prevailing wage, 30% credit. If you get the domestic content piece of this, you can get up to 40%. There are some other adders in here, energy communities, low-income communities, which our members also serve, which add another 10% and another 20% respectively. So you could have a vast majority of your project, if you're in those qualifying areas, covered by a tax credit. And to your point about ownership versus having PPAs, this will give co-op members at least the opportunity to do a cost-benefit analysis, really look at, can we own this asset or do we have to keep paying rent to purchase the power? I think it's going to be a very effective tool once it's put in place.
Well, kudos to you and your team for getting it done. Thanks so much for coming on and talking to us, Paul.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Let's pause here for a word from our sponsor, and when we come back, we'll talk to two co-op leaders who have big plans to leverage the new direct pay law.
NRECA's Along Those Lines podcast is proudly supported by Power Intel. Since 1963, Power Intel has been serving the communications industry. Their extensive distribution system provides electrical co-ops and contractors with a cost-effective and reliable way to get the range of products needed to build and maintain communications networks. They offer efficient solutions for solving supply chain challenges and go the extra mile to get you the right product at the right place and time.
I'm Tori Tedder Laughlin from Oklahoma Electric Cooperative in Norman, Oklahoma. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. Mac McLennan is president and CEO of Minnkota Power Cooperative, a generation and transmission co-op based in Grand Forks, North Dakota. They have a lot of experience with working with partners to access federal tax incentives and some significant projects that stand to gain from the new direct pay law. Mac, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for talking to us.
Yeah, happy to do it. Thanks for inviting me.
So we've heard from Paul Gutierrez about how the direct pay law was passed and some of the national implications of that new law. I want to get a sense of what it means on the ground for co-ops. So talk us through some of the projects that you have in mind for Minnkota that will take advantage of this new law and this funding availability.
Yeah, to your point, it's extremely valuable to folks like us, and it really provides additional opportunities. So if you think about historically, our only option was to have to go to somebody who could monetize the tax credits, and that's really been opened up where we can work on our own projects now, or at least have the capacity to. Doesn't mean you necessarily will, but has the capacity to. So in our case, for the last 7 years on the carbon capture side, we've been working on a project that I think is significantly now freed up for us to pursue with individuals where we don't have to use tax equity. I think one of the great advantages people don't recognize is the value created by not having to have somebody monetize this for you. And so the direct pay aspects of it, assuming we're successful, are really valuable. The real advantage is we don't have to go find a partner. And that is more valuable than I think people understand.
You already have a fairly diverse resource portfolio. Do you see this more accessible tax incentive changing your strategic resource plan? Is this going to expand what you can add to your mix?
I don't know that it necessarily changes our plan. I think it gives us the greater opportunity that we can own it and help better control the circumstances that it operates under. So we are looking at it at the moment under what I deem kind of no regrets, which is, are there some projects that we would put on that might not otherwise even actually fit in our plan, but go onto our transmission system, we could fund on our own and own rather than having to have a third party do so.
And you mentioned before that the biggest advantage is this idea that you don't have to go out and get partners. You don't have to get these entities with tax appetite to help you. Talk about what you've done up until this point. When you have had these projects that you have clearly qualified for federal money, but you have to have that tax appetite. Talk about some of the difficulty and the complication associated with that.
We have 6 contracts right now with third parties for 6 renewable projects where ultimately you enter into an agreement with somebody who goes to the market and you don't have any sense of what's happening on the other side of your transaction, right? You're led to believe, and I think it is at least partially true, that the tax benefits flow through and the costs that you get from the energy that you purchase from that, but certainly the monetization of all the tax credits goes somewhere else. So it's not necessarily about whether you monetize them or not. It's whether you have the capacity to do it without having to go to a third party who is making a return on their transaction as well. Nobody really knows how the rules work on this yet. So our assumption when we look at the models is that we will have a direct benefit in the sense that we don't have to pay 2 parties. One is you don't have to pay a return to the individuals who are doing the project. And then secondly, you pay a fee to those guys who are doing the monetization.
Are there any projects that you've had in mind that you've wanted to do that you've been holding off on to see if this law was going to get through, or that you've just basically said, we can't do that because we don't want to take on another partnership? Are those now back on the table?
I think we're beginning to see where direct pay may help us advance opportunity projects faster than we might have otherwise, but not directly projects we put on hold waiting to see if this would be on the table. So it's created opportunities for us, at least in our case, and every utility obviously is going to be different in terms of where its value proposition is.
Before I let you go, why is this an important win for co-ops? And at the G&T level, what are some of the things that you can impart to other G&T managers that this will help them look where they're going with their portfolio?
Yeah, I think the greatest thing that this does, obviously, is it gives you flexibility to choose options that might have not been available to you before. Your option before, if you didn't have a tax appetite like us, is you partner with somebody. That's the only way you can get the value of the incentive that was being provided. What direct pay does is either gives you the opportunity to work with a whole cast of characters, because there's a limited number of people who play in the tax equity marketplace. The biggest thing that it did is gave you your own chance. But the other thing it is provided you the opportunity for partners who might take on the direct pay as well that you work with, that you don't have to go through the whole tax equity monetization scheme.
One thing I wanted to get into earlier when you were talking about carbon capture, Project Tundra is something you've been working on for a few years. Can we get into a little details about how far down the line you are with that and how this new tax incentive may help you project it forward in a way that may not have been possible earlier?
Our goal is to make a decision with respect to Project Tundra by the third quarter of this year. So let's say that all projects have slipped. My goal is in 2023 to make a decision about whether the project goes forward, and hopefully into the third quarter would be ideal. And what it has done, to your point, is when we started with Tundra pre-direct pay, our option was to go fundamentally to New York and sit down with a handful of individuals who have a tax appetite big enough that they would be even contemplating taking on Tundra. You think about Tundra, that's $1 billion in tax credits. So to find firms who have $1 billion worth of tax liability is a pretty small pool in the greater scheme of things. So what direct pay has done is created the opportunity, in our case, to go to a large number of individuals who might not have to have that level of tax appetite to be able to make the project go forward. So again, that's why I say its value might very well be in the capacity to work with others on very large projects that you might not otherwise have access to. Because our pool was extremely limited when you start thinking about who has the monetization capacity. Under direct pay, that's not the case. So now you could have a very large company who has the capacity to participate but doesn't have a huge tax appetite.
Well, it's a really positive development for co-op, and I look forward to seeing what you and Minnkota do with this as you go forward. So, Mac, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge about it.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it, and look forward to continuing to work on this as we move ahead.
Next, we'll talk to Eric Jung. He's the CEO of Northeastern REMC in Indiana. They already have a handful of renewable projects for their members and plans to expand those offerings with this new tax provision. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Scott. This is a really important topic. I'm glad to speak about it.
So we've been talking to some other folks about direct pay. What I want to get from you is a sense of what it means on the ground at a distribution co-op level. As you're looking at this new provision, what are some projects that you are planning at Northeastern that you can take advantage of this direct pay that may not have been available just a few months ago?
Absolutely. So very specifically, we're moving forward with some utility scale solar projects. And the nice thing about the new law is that we've got a number of years to deploy that over. We don't have to try to rush the projects out in one season. We've already done substantial asset additions in battery storage. So the solar is going to make a really nice addition to that.
And you guys have a residential solar program, you have community solar. Are those kind of the things that you can either expand using this provision in the tax code now or start new programs that add on to that?
So we do have a small community solar project that we've already done. It was done under the old method, of course, where we had a partner that took advantage of the tax credits. This new endeavor, these will be assets that are owned by the cooperative. We would like to reserve at least one of the fields that we're going to do for a very large community solar project. But overall, that's where we're headed.
I think I know the answer to this, but does this change your resource planning going forward? I mean, up until recently, there was a significant barrier to doing these projects. Does this make you look at your resource planning again and maybe change your plans?
It certainly does. The biggest impact, I would say, is that we're able to deploy more resources in less time. Even though we're going to spread it out over a number of years, having 30% of the project cost returned to us as a grant is going to greatly increase the number of these assets that we can put out.
You mentioned that the community solar was done under the old method. Talk a little bit about how that has worked for you, some of the difficulties and the complexities involved. And does it sort of make it harder to say yes sometimes to a clean energy project?
Absolutely. It does. They work, they function. You can set up these arrangements so that someone else can take advantage of those benefits, but they are complex. And what we found, especially when we went to look at utility scale projects that were meant to be assets of the cooperative, not just community solar, the developers were taking an awfully significant portion of the tax credits for themselves. These are benefits that they would receive up front in the project, greatly increasing their return on investment. Yet most of those savings were not passed along. At the end of the day, you're at the negotiating table with one hand tied behind your back when the other party knows that you can't take advantage of the tax credits.
So we talked earlier to Paul Gutierrez from NRECA, and he was talking a little bit about how they're working with Treasury and the federal government to get the rules for this new tax provision structured in a way most useful for cooperatives. Is there anything you'd like to see in those rules that would be helpful at the distribution level?
I think specifically what we're looking for is that at the completion of the project, we would like to see, as soon as that asset is capitalized and online and in service, to see those funds sent to the cooperative immediately so that we don't have to wait for the end of the year.
So give us a sense of how big of a win this really is. On a national level, not only just for Northeastern, but how much is this going to change the way co-ops do business in this sort of clean energy space going forward?
I think this was huge. I really do. For both solar and battery storage as well. We've obviously already made those investments. But I think what you're going to see is where historically rural America has lagged our investor-owned counterparts somewhat in terms of clean energy deployments. Being able to take advantage of these tax credits directly will greatly increase the number of these resources that are deployed, the investments made in rural America.
I appreciate you coming on and giving us your perspective. I really can't wait to see how this sort of unfolds in the years coming up.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Scott.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and our sponsor, Power and Tell. For more on this and other podcasts, visit us at electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm Tori Giger from Cooperative Energy in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.